Good afternoon.
Hello.
Hi there. Welcome to
Hi.
our workshop. So I am Colin Scott. I'm one of the frontline services leads with Hourglass, and my particular responsibility is for Scotland and Northern Ireland, but I do work across all four nations as well. And we've also got Bethany with us.
Oh, we've got another person in the waiting
Oh,
room, which is
yeah.
good. Yeah, I'm Beth. I'll wait for Sonia to join. Hi. Yeah, so I'm Beth. I'm the Information and Data Officer at Hourglass. So I deal with all of the frontline service data, which we're going to be talking a bit about today as well. But yeah, I don't know if people want to introduce themselves or.
Hello. My name's Helena Paul. I'm not a professional in this area. I'm actually a concerned family member and came to Hourglass through phoning your helpline, and it's been a really interesting day so far. My particular interest is economic abuse and abuse of power of attorney by a close family member of another close family member. And I suspect we're in the realms of coercive control. Hence my questions I've made earlier about, why is it only the law in Scotland only recognises partners and former partners as perpetrators of coercive control, when actually there's a potential for that, for older people in particular, to be adult children or grandchildren. And I'm really interested in learning as much as I possibly can about this area, as much as I can about the data of it. And I think we probably need to look at the legislative framework in Scotland to offer more protection for our older people that are facing, potential economic abuse. So thank you.
Well, thanks for sharing that. And I think you might have read our notes, but anyway, we'll
Sorry.
we'll be picking up definitely some of the things that you've mentioned there. So I do hope that the session is helpful for you. Um, and yeah, and if you've got any issues with your camera or your microphone, that's no problem at all. Anything you want to say, you can just drop into the chat. Um, I will say that I'm happy to be interrupted when I'm talking, but Beth and I will share the presentation out.
Yeah.
So if anybody does have any questions, either shout them out or drop them into the chat, and we'll try and address those. Um, so yeah, we are Hourglass. Now, obviously, you know a bit about who we are because you're here, and I presume you've heard of us, and that's what's brought you here. I presume that you've heard some of the content so far today. But we are the only UK-wide charity calling time on the harm, abuse, and exploitation of older people. This session, of course, we are going to be looking specifically at the economic abuse of older people in Scotland, and some of the challenges, some of the facts and the kind of statistics that we have, and yeah, and I guess what we currently are doing and are able to do, and what we would want to be able to do if certain challenges were removed. So that's really what we're covering today. Our helpline has already been mentioned, but that operates 24/7. It's free to call from a UK landline or mobile, and it's through that helpline and our other channels, we do offer support to older victims, age 60 plus, and concerned others, about people who are concerned about someone who is in that age category who might be at risk of or experiencing abuse. Okay.
Yeah, so should I just jump straight into the stats?
Yes, go for
So
it. Yeah.
yeah, so this data is from our frontline services. So just some context around that. That can be helpline calls, online interaction, sort of any time we interact with a concerned other or a victim survivor. The data is recorded obviously anonymously and categorized. So from this, we can see here that economic abuse is the most prevalent form of abuse within our service. If you look here, it is 43%, and that's followed by psychological abuse, which accounts for 37%. So interestingly, out of those 43%, 14% of those cases, so 1/4, power of attorney was actually identified as involved. So just issues around kind of the abuse of that. So again, that is a fairly prominent area, which Colin will be talking about a bit later on, specifically in the panel later, where we have the Willie's Law campaigners and everything.
Sorry, can I just recap? What was that stat that you said, that the number of power of attorneys involved in the economic abuse?
Yeah, so 14% of our cases involve power of attorney in some way. So that can be kind of abusing it from the solicitor's point of view or from the family member's point of view. And also 11% of cases of economic abuse involve some form of scam as well. I'm just going to submit Karen in. Brill. So moving on from that, we can see that it's also a very central issue to our work and has massive financial impacts for older victims around Scotland. So you can see here, we didn't record it in 2020-21, we just started recording it in 2021. But you can see that over £4 million was lost due to economic abuse in Scotland from 2021 to 2025. In the last financial year alone, £1.6 million was reported as stolen, essentially from older people in Scotland. And importantly, this is actually, we only know the value of economic abuse in 31% of our cases. And so essentially, this is a very big underestimation of the true figure that is lost. So this just really underlines the importance of dealing with economic abuse. In terms of the location of economic abuse, Nika actually in the housing panel did mention this earlier in terms of wider domestic abuse. But the majority of our cases, the economic abuse is happening in the home, so in 89% of cases. And this just really exacerbates that invisible nature of abuse that we've been talking about the entire day, and presents some real challenges to sort of identifying that and addressing it. And then in terms of the perpetrator gender, this is actually quite interesting in terms of it's very different from the wider domestic abuse sphere. So you can see here that the alleged perpetrator was female in 42% of economic abuse cases in Scotland in the last financial year. Obviously, if you're thinking about domestic abuse more broadly in kind of younger demographics as well, the perpetrator is overwhelmingly male. But actually in older victim survivors, and particularly in economic abuse, you can see here that the perpetrator is female in nearly equal amounts of the cases. In terms of the victim survivor, they are more likely to be female still. So 73% of economic abuse victim survivors in our service were female in the last financial year. Thinking about the relationship, this actually touches on what we were speaking about earlier in the call. So you can see here that sons and daughters are the primary perpetrators. They make up 57% of all our economic abuse cases in Scotland in 2024 and the 2025 financial year. And as we have been talking about the domestic abuse definition in Scotland, some real challenges are posed here in around the fact that partners are actually only the perpetrator in 11% of cases. So a lot of these cases are being missed through that definition. In terms of family members being the most prolific perpetrator, this could be tied to things like ageist stereotypes and also a perceived entitlement to the victim survivor's money. So for example, if they expect they will be left money in a will, they might believe, oh, well, I'm going to get it anyway, so why not have it now? They might feel that because of their older age, they don't need as much money. And obviously we know that this is ageism, and these are the foundations that contribute to the prevalence of economic abuse in Scotland. Kind of linking to this, you can see here we did a 2024 survey called Growing Old in the UK, and it has actually been discussed earlier on in the day. This survey was done in partnership with YouGov. Oh, sorry, I thought someone spoke. This was done in partnership with YouGov, and so you can see here 1 in 4 people did not see taking money from an older relative's bank account or precious items from their home as abuse. There's a few more of these. So 1 in 4 did not see trying to change an older relative's will as abuse. And 1 in 4 did not see using a power of attorney over an older relative for personal financial gain as abuse. In terms of what these stats tell us overall, so we know that economic abuse is a prolific issue in Scotland. Over £1 million are taken from older people in Scotland every year, and that is definitely an underestimation, as we have discussed. Older people are more likely to experience economic abuse in their own home, and it's normally perpetrated by someone they love, trust, and or depend on. And so, as I said, in 89% of cases, the abuse did take place in the home, and in nearly 60% of cases, the perpetrator was an adult child. Speaking about in terms of dependency as well, so in 60% approximately of our economic abuse cases in Scotland in the past year, the victim survivor actually had a disability. So again, this might lean into those kind of dependent roles. We also know that common public perceptions around who perpetrates economic abuse might not always be representative of the picture. So, for example, a lot of discourse can focus around professionals. And obviously, we know from our stats that actually it is more likely to be a family member. And although those groups are important to think about, we do need to broaden kind of the way we look at it. And finally, that ageist stereotypes and a perceived entitlement act as the foundations for economic abuse. And that really is highlighted in our Growing Old in the UK survey. So all of these features, alongside some quite specific policy context to Scotland, which Colin is going to be speaking about, definitely impact how economic abuse is identified, addressed, and prevented within the abuse of older people more widely. Colin will be going through kind of the more frontline side of things next, but I wondered if anyone had, I suppose, any reflections based off of the stats, or any questions, or just anything they felt they wanted to share.
Yeah, I think what's quite interesting is that there's an assumption perhaps that people will recognise they're suffering abuse, but if it's a close family member, it may well be that even the person themselves, they're of a generation which will say to themselves, oh, I don't need so much money now, or it's okay, they're going to get the house anyway, they might as well just move in, or I might as well just let them have access to my bank account because it's going to be easier for them that way. And the individual themselves, I'm not saying this to victim blame at all, but because the individual themselves may not recognise it as abuse, it then makes intervening all the more difficult. And I'm just wondering what any insights that you could offer on how to make it easier for the person to recognise that actually what they're suffering is not right.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, Colin will probably be able to give more of that practical guidance around how you can encourage victim survivors to see what is happening. But that's definitely quite a common thing we see in our service. So we do track barriers to help, and one of them is victim survivors maybe just not being aware or not being able to identify that actually what they're experiencing is abuse. But Colin, I didn't know if you wanted to add.
Yeah, so that's again, that's something that I will be talking about in a moment, in a bit more detail. But certainly, in terms of I guess some kind of practical steps or tips, I always think with a situation like this, if it's possible to perhaps frame the discussion in terms of, if someone else was being impacted in that way, if someone else, if there's, I think kind of socializing the sort of victim survivor into recognizing what's going on is sometimes easier than perhaps explaining it to them. So helping them to realize that, you know, relationships don't necessarily have to be like this, and that, just because a family member is putting pressure on you to give them money, for example, or because ultimately they're in the will and they are going to receive it, so you could just give them it now. None of those things necessarily are true in and of themselves. That it's um so while the adult is still alive and has capacity, it's theirs, and they have the say over what happens to it. It is not up to anybody else what happens to it's not up to anybody else what happens to my finances, and it's not up to anyone else what happens to an older victim survivor's finances. It is theirs to do with as they want. Now, obviously, that they could still make choices that we don't agree with in regards to that. However, if it is their choice rather than someone else heavily influencing them, that's the thing. It has to be about their choice. And again, that can be quite tricky to kind of get to the bottom of, how much influence is being exerted, which again probably says we need to revisit the Domestic Abuse Act in Scotland, because coercive control comes under the Act. And what we know about this, as Bethany has shown us, 57% of perpetrators are the sons and daughters, and they will basically get away with it under that current legislation. Obviously, if they can be found guilty of a crime around this, then they can be prosecuted under that. But the domestic abuse aggravator won't be there, and coercive and controlling behaviour can't be prosecuted in that respect. So I think changes to the Domestic Abuse Act are absolutely essential to tackle a lot of this. So it was a
If
bit
there are,
long-winded, but that's
Thank
some
you.
thoughts on that.
no, it's quite complicated, obviously, a topic, so the answers probably will be bit long-winded. Should we move on, Colin, to the more frontline service
Yep.
side of things?
Okay, so I'm just going to take some suggestions from the floor here. Any factors that we think might make an older person more at risk, bearing in mind that I think the 80 to 85-year-old age group is the most common victim age, basically, for people that will be experiencing this type of abuse. So what sort of factors might put somebody more at risk in that category? You can type in your answers, you can shout them out. Yep, see we've got one there. Yep, digital by default services definitely is an issue. In an increasingly digital world, older people can become more easily dependent on somebody else, or can more easily fall victim to a scam. So there's a lot of disability, being housebound. Yep, so that kind of being isolated, but also perhaps having to rely on somebody else. So I've got a few suggestions on the next slide, but these have all been mentioned, I think, so far. So yeah, social isolation, dependence upon others, potentially decline in physical health, mobility. So not able to get out and do their banking, for example. They might then be surrendering that to a family member or a friend who is not necessarily honest. Mental capacity issues might be exploited or might be used falsely as to screen what's actually happening. And there might be a lack of familiarity with financial matters. So take the example of an older couple, been married 50 years. One of them has always looked after the finances, but now they're not able to anymore. Perhaps they've died, perhaps they've lost capacity, perhaps they're in a care home, whatever it may be. They're not around and able to do that anymore. So the remaining partner doesn't have those skills and that confidence. They might reach out to somebody else to help them with that. And again, that somebody else might not have their best interests at heart. And yeah, that lack of digital confidence or literacy in an increasingly digital world can also make it difficult and put somebody more at risk. Thank you. So we'll move on to the next slide. So this one here, there's a whole bunch of reasons why people might not report abuse. And once again, I'm just going to ask for a couple of suggestions, but there are a lot. If anybody has any thoughts why older people might not be seeking support or why it might not be getting reported. Yep, love for the family member. Yep. Because at the end of the day, if that's your son or daughter, you might not want to get them into trouble. Not realizing it's abuse, not wanting to get them into trouble, fear over not being believed. Yep, exactly. So these are all on this slide, and there's a few more. So we're just going to quickly throw all of these up. There's quite a few. So you can see here lots of barriers potentially to an older person seeking support or reporting what's going on. But I think some of the most kind of insidious ones are that not recognizing it as abuse. Perhaps they've been in that relationship for a long, long time, and it's just become normalized, or they don't have a kind of frame of reference as to what should happen in this relationship. Shouldn't we be giving our children what they want from us, even when our children are in their 40s and 50s, and really should be able to have a bit more independence from us and not be relying on us so much to give them, um, you know, everything that they ask for. We've already heard in earlier sessions about accessibility, and that's, we talk about sometimes hard to reach communities, and we talk about victims' accessibility needs, but actually the onus probably has to be on the services, and we have to be putting more structures and better structures in place so that nobody is left behind, and that there is no kind of invisible crimes and invisible victims here. And capacity is definitely an issue. The victim may have been gaslighted, and told by the perpetrator, well, people are just going to say that you've got dementia, and nobody's going to believe you. So yeah, so you can see there's quite a few reasons why people might not report or seek support. And then in terms of signs to look out for, so I'll just kind of talk through these very briefly. So some of the signs that somebody might be experiencing economic abuse, well, as with any abuse, a sudden change in character could point to abuse happening. The next one is excusing or justifying the behavior of a partner or family member. So I think we've already kind of touched on this in the call, that the parent might be saying, well, he's lost his job, so I'm just helping him out. Or he's under a lot of stress, that's why he shouts at me and why I give him the money. Suddenly selling property or making changes to a will or power of attorney, those are big decisions, and for those to be made very kind of suddenly out of the blue, that certainly could be a sign that somebody is being coerced and is being financially abused. No longer having access to their own bank account is a major red flag. If somebody doesn't have access to their own bank account, has no idea what's happening in there, that usually suggests that even if there is legitimate kind of power of attorney in place and all of that, for the adult, if they're still if they are still able to kind of process any of that stuff, for them not to know what's going on and not to have any access to their bank account, that's not right. And then the partner, the family member, won't allow the victim to be on their own with you. So if you're a professional or even just a friend wanting to visit, if you're not allowed to see the older person on their own, that's often a sign that person is being controlled and manipulated and being abused potentially. Okay, thank you. So we've got yes, that's a good point. So changes to mortgage terms as well. So remortgaging after the property has already been paid off, and that's again something that, as I'm sure you'll have come across as well, Sonu. That's something that we come across as well, in terms of, mortgages being taken out again after the property has been paid off. And we do see, older people left with massive debts. And again, in Scotland, there's not really any way of addressing coerced debt. So that's something that I would be very keen to see changed.
Just
So yeah,
sort of
sorry.
Sorry, Colin, I was going to say, just sort of adding to that as well, the conversations that have been happening this morning make me think about the fact that, for example, no longer having access to your own bank account, older people are sometimes alienated by those digital modes that we currently use. And I think that's something which definitely is growing in kind of attention. The fact that, maybe a family member has the bank account on their phone.
Yeah.
And so things like that are just different examples I was just thinking of to how people rationalize, I suppose, that moving of control from the individual to wider networks.
Yep, absolutely right. And it is, just that balance of when does somebody helping become, cross that line into actually taking control.
Yeah.
So this was a real case that we have dealt with in Scotland at Hourglass. We've changed the names and some of the details, but the kind of gist of it is the case that we dealt with. So Helen contacted Hourglass. She called our helpline because she was experiencing financial and psychological abuse from her son John, who lived with her. John basically refused to seek employment. He had had jobs, but he'd never really held them down. And then, he just sort of gave up trying in the end. And so he manipulated Helen into providing him with thousands of pounds over a 5-year period. I mean, tens of thousands actually. And that included purchase of a car and other things. I think also payment towards his own property, which he then never took up. Over this time, John became verbally abusive to his mother, and Helen became reliant on John for transport to medical appointments, the bank, and shopping. And John would use this to exploit her, demanding payment for journeys. So I think, is there a little bit more on this one? Yeah, there we go. So what we were able to do at Hourglass was we supported Helen to access adult support and protection at the local council, who put in a package of support so that Helen could get out to shopping. Somebody was provided that would help her to get to shopping and to appointments. She was empowered to take back control of her life, as she no longer relied on John, and eventually told him to move out as his aggressive and abusive behaviour continued and actually escalated the more control that she was taking of her situation. Hourglass also liaised with other support services such as community mental health and a local befriending service to ensure Helen had the support that she needs to live safely. So unfortunately, in that case, there wasn't really any kind of fix in terms of the financial harm, but it was stopped going forward. There was, and in actual fact, she changed her will. I know that Helen did actually change her will to radically reduce, in fact, completely minimize the amount that John would inherit. So yeah, just again over to you. We've got a couple of other sort of case studies, and I just want to hear from you. Either raise your hand or just shout out whenever one of these things demonstrates a red flag to you. So we've got Jerry, who doesn't know how much money he has in his bank. Jerry doesn't have a bank card or bank book. Jerry's daughter, yep, red flag, yep. Jerry's daughter looks after this for him. Jerry's daughter has the bank statements, so Jerry hasn't seen one for over a year. And apparently this is because Jerry gets muddled, although you, the person who Jerry is speaking to, know that Jerry has mental capacity to make his own decisions. So yes, correctly, there was at least one red flag identified in there. What? So anybody got? Yeah, all of the above. But Yeah, well, yes, I suppose, if you deal with this stuff day in, day out, you perhaps may be more attuned and more cynical to it. Um, but yes, there's a lot of red flags on this one. Because yeah, if Jerry is basically of sound mind, has capacity to make his own decisions, there's no reason why he shouldn't know how much money he has in the bank. He should have access to that. He should be, you know, pretty much in control of that. Um, he doesn't really need anybody else to be controlling that for him, especially if that control means that he has no access to it and no awareness of it. So yes, all of that would be red flags to me. Um, and then we've got another one quickly to just run through. So Sheila attends a lunch club at the community centre, and she mentions to somebody there that her heating hasn't been working. And so they ask, how long has this been going on? And she says 6 months. Sheila's boiler is broken and she can't afford to have it repaired. She's in debt. She took out a credit card to pay off a debt for her son some years ago. He was supposed to pay it back, but has only repaid the odd amount here and there. The debt was £15,000 and he has only repaid £500. Sheila's son can be very aggressive and shouts at her when she tries to ask about repayments, and he has threatened her in the past. So, once again, any red flags, and is there anything in particular there that you would be concerned about, would want to perhaps contact Hourglass about, or some other services?
Sorry, Colin. I think can you hear me okay?
Yep.
It's all red flags, isn't it? It just says the piece around taking out a credit card. I worked in the youth sector before joining Hourglass and working in the sector. And a lot of times people took out allowed other family members to take credit cards and mobile phone contracts and all of those things out in their name. So in this case, I'm not sure if it was in the lady's name or the son's name, but that's a big red flag where you're taking credit on behalf of someone else. So and
Yeah.
it's really hard to quantify, isn't it, for an organization like Hourglass to try and establish how much debt is potentially out there because of these type of abuses. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's it. And so again, we can see the value that has essentially been stolen, because this
Mhm.
is coerced debt. That's
Yeah.
£15,000 that
Mhm.
the son has basically stolen from her, and it has essentially paralyzed his
Mhm.
mother, who can't afford to have her heating replaced, her heating
Mhm.
fixed. So yes, an excellent point. I also would say this is a potential safeguarding concern.
Mhm.
In the real life scenario that this one is based on, unfortunately, the adults didn't actually qualify for it. So again, similar to, I think, what I hinted at earlier on the Safer Aging panel this morning. This one didn't actually meet the criteria, didn't meet the threshold, which is difficult, because you kind of look at this and say, this is a person who actually is in quite serious need here, but because they didn't meet the kind of 3 point criteria, they didn't really have any kind of serious care and support needs. It was essentially dismissed. But yes, I would certainly consider this to be a matter to take to adult safeguarding or adult protection. Okay, so I think we've got a little bit about some of the challenges.
Yes, so I'll start just talking about some data stuff again. So sorry if you're not into the stats. But from my point of view, and obviously this also has been talked about quite a lot so far this morning, which is great to see. But there is very little data specifically focused on the abuse of older people, and then again, even less so in Scotland, and that does include police data, for example. And as Veronica mentioned earlier on in the day, we weren't actually able to create the Safer Aging Index in 2022 for Scotland because of this issue. And although maybe I'm biased because obviously I work in the research field, obviously data is very important in identifying the issue and also the ways forward. And even I hope I was able to demonstrate earlier on in the workshop kind of how valuable Hourglass's data is, because it is quite unique in that, as I've said, we don't have that many places with this specific data. And so, yeah, a challenge from my point of view is just the lack of data and kind of that 65 plus category, where it doesn't split down into kind of more specific ages, and it treats them as kind of a homogenous group. But now I'll pass on to Colin to talk a bit more about the Scottish context.
Yep, thanks, Beth. So the Domestic Abuse Act in Scotland was passed in 2018. That represented an opportunity for us to broaden the definition, and unfortunately, that opportunity was missed. Hourglass, or under our previous name, Action on Elder Abuse, we actually did campaign for that to be expanded so that other family members would be included as potential perpetrators. But at the moment, the Act still is limited to intimate partner abuse, so partners and ex-partners. Whereas in all the other nations of the UK, the respective acts do take into account wider family members. Now, we saw only 11% of perpetrators of economic abuse in Scotland are the partners. So, you know, we're everyone else is basically getting away with it under the Domestic Abuse Act. So that needs to change, basically. The next point was so yeah, we've heard actually. I mean, it's almost hot off the press, but in September of this year, we've had the release now of the first adult protection kind of data, which there wasn't really a reliable source for that data up until now, up until September of this year. It was very mixed in terms of how local authorities were gathering and reporting that data. So there was no kind of consistency about that. So there was a pilot that was carried out in I think 3 local authorities, and that I think has now been expanded to the whole of Scotland. So all local authorities should be now reporting that stuff in the same way. The next thing was, the Office of the Public Guardian in Scotland. So obviously Scotland has its own Office of the Public Guardian. That it's a small team, and it's probably not equipped adequately, probably not adequately resourced to deal with all power of attorney concerns. Obviously, bearing in mind they can only address financial powers in Scotland. But as we're demonstrating here, that's quite a lot of cases potentially. So I think more resourcing for the Office of the Public Guardian, and probably more powers for them as well when they're investigating. And then I think there's one more challenge you identified.
Yeah, I was just going to mention Helena made a really great point in the chat about if people can't get through to the triage, then how will they appear in the statistics? And this is something that within data is a real challenge more generally. So even our Hourglass data, obviously we can only speak about people who have come to our service, so it can't be reflective of everyone. But in this specific issue around triage, Colin, I didn't know if you had anything to add around that.
Yeah, so I know that on the limited data that was available in the past, I think they did collect data on the numbers of referrals that had been received, but obviously, not all of those go through to the inquiry stage, and then even less will get through to the full investigation stage, and even less then will have the kind of outcomes like banning orders and so on. So I think the stats may still reflect the demand or the referrals that are coming in, but the other side of that, of course, is not everybody's even making the referral. Not everybody's aware what to do in terms of adult protection. Not everybody is able to do it. So there's always still going to be people that aren't captured in the stats. And then, yeah, the Adults with Incapacity Act is now, I think, 25 years old. So it is outdated. It is under review, but there's definitely changes that are needed in terms of mental capacity legislation in Scotland and how we support adults who are no longer capable of making those decisions. And then I think we've just got a couple more bits to go through. So, yep, our services. So what we actually do, so you've heard, I'm sure, about our helpline, 24/7, free phone, from anywhere in the UK. And we also have our online services, instant messenger and text service and email. On our website, you can find lots of useful information. And similarly on our knowledge bank, which is you can access it via the website. And then we also deliver one-to-one casework support. So in Scotland, if there was a victim who came to us either through the helpline or referred by another service, we can provide that one-to-one casework support in this kind of short to medium term. And we also have a qualified IDA, which is myself. I believe I'm the first older person's IDA in Scotland, because I'm the first one that Hourglass certainly has put through the training. So that's an independent domestic abuse advocate. In England, they're called IDVAs. And we also do awareness raising training. We get out in the community and hand out leaflets. We deliver training sessions, information sessions to community groups. So yeah, that's kind of what we're about, really. And then, yep, and also just to say, we're not competing with statutory services. We work with statutory services. We refer to adult protection and they refer to us. We are building pathways with other services as well, such as the police, but we're not trying to do their job. We're to support and resource each other.
Yeah, I'm conscious we're right on
Yes,
time.
yeah.
Just want to say thank you all for coming. Please do, if you have any questions, get in touch. And you can see here lots of resources that are on our knowledge bank. So if you just Google knowledge bank Hourglass, lots of interesting practical resources, research reports, policy briefs, webinars, legislation even. It has it all. So yeah, do check that out if you want any more information. But thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Bye-bye.